Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about the Dwarf Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires based on your votes. And in last place we have Thoric Ironbrow, the free DLC Legendary Lord that was introduced in Warhammer 2 with a bit of a minor dwarf rework, or rather, not really a rework, just some changes to the grudge system and the addition of the Forge. Now, the issues that I personally have with Thoric Ironbrow, myself, is that every Legendary Lord has some kind of Legendary Grudge that is associated with them. The problem for Thoric is, one, his grudge is the least rewarding out of all of them, because you're just gaining 2,500 Oath Gold, which may seem like a lot, but compared to things like the Underway, even calling the Miners, or the Landmark in Vol's Anvil, though honestly that's not really rewarding all that much, but the Landmark in the Oak of Ages, or even a unique Dwarf Lord or Grudge Seller unit capacity per army, this just feels less rewarding to begin with. But on top of that, and I would say more importantly with Thoric, his army priority is to buff up Quarrelers and Grudge Throwers and all of that by a fairly significant amount. That's great, and it worked quite well pre-patch, pre-Thrones of Decay, but right now I would say like Quarrelers and Grudge Throwers are some of the most boring units to use in a Dwarf roster because of all the changes they've gotten. I would much rather use Thunderers, Iron Drakes, Gyrocopters, and Cannons in a Dwarf campaign right now as opposed to Quarrelers. I still recruit Quarrelers in my campaigns, to be sure, but they're more of a filler unit than anything else. So that's kind of one of the things that does drag down this campaign for me. Beyond that, it's also the campaign starting position. You do end up wasting a lot of time in this campaign to just complete your initial set of grudges, your first Age of Reckoning. And there used to be the bug where if you confederated the minor faction of the Dwarves, it would also increase the amount of grudges you would need for a Legendary Lord. That has been fixed, but Thoric still has some issues with that, because he's gonna struggle completing a Legendary Grudge. He only has one quest battle that gives him any kind of settled grudges, so he's actually gonna confederate other Legendary Lords of the Dwarves in the slowest possible fashion, I would dare say. On top of that, he kind of has a bad climate situation. Well, not horrible, to be sure, but having unpleasant frozen does limit his potential with respect to, say, getting Malachi or getting Grombrindle. Basically, Dwarf Lords that have frozen are actually in a better position from my perspective. Because, yeah, being able to confederate Grombrindle especially is a significant benefit if the climate suits you. Speaking about climate, you may be pushed into fighting wars with, say, Manfred at the very least, in unpleasant climate in the desert. And while you do have jungle, jungle is genuinely the worst kind of climate to play a campaign in. For any campaign. It is better for the Dwarves because you do have the Underway, but yeah, just this way of building an empire across, you know, a line from the south to the north and leaving yourself very exposed to various factions is not particularly great. Those would be my reasons for ranking Thoric in the lowest possible tier, but at the same time, that's not necessarily what people are thinking about with this particular campaign. Let's move on. Then we have Belegar Ironhammer as the second worst Dwarven campaign, or the second lowest campaign of the Dwarves according to your votes. Now, Belegar is a really powerful character. His heroes, his named ghost heroes, are also exceptionally powerful, and you do have a pretty good hero squad from the very beginning. His skill line is genuinely amazing. Things like construction costs for provincial capital buildings, things like hero recruitment of Thanes in all provinces and Thane capacity, all kinds of other benefits, especially that global recruitment duration benefit and global recruitment capacity. So that's great. But here's the problem. His campaign doesn't really feel like the quest for Carrick 8 Peaks. Old World does this significantly better. Instead, what you feel like when you're playing a Belegar campaign for a good portion of the early game is genuine frustration. Frustration because you're dealing with a campaign where you're playing with 50% upkeep increase until you get Carrick 8 peaks. And I'll be honest in saying it, even when you get Carrick 8 peaks, it takes a very long time for that to be worth it. You certainly do get significant faction benefits and you lose that plus 50% upkeep, but it's still pretty annoying. And then having a leadership benefit when laying siege and Vanguard deployment in underway battles just feels rather pointless. It can certainly be a fun campaign because you can conquer all of Athel Lorem pretty quickly. You certainly have the power for it. You can deal with Skaven Blight pretty early on. But I don't know, from a thematic standpoint, this campaign just feels like it misses the mark by a lot. And while eventually you do get Carrick 8 peaks and all the benefits there, and you even get things like magical attacks for all units faction-wide if you do upgrade it, that was recently changed, is frustrating. At the very least, the Confederation situation on Carrick Hearn has been fixed, but honestly, confederating Carrick Hearn early on for an event doesn't really feel worth it because it just starts as a tier 1 settlement. You're probably better off actually waiting until they build up some strength and then confederating or getting higher tier buildings, especially if you're playing on Legendary. But you can at least make it work. It's just certain issues that do come from that particular perspective. Belegar is a legendary lord, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think he's worth more to confederate than he is to play in his campaign. In terms of climate, he has mountain, wasteland, and savanna for whatever reason, but again, he's missing the frozen climate. That's not a campaign ender necessarily, but it certainly does limit the potential you can achieve with him in the long term, because Norska is now frozen in mountain, Nagrand is all of it frozen, Kislev is of course frozen, so again, limited potential in this campaign compared to other dwarf campaigns and faction effects that just don't feel that meaningful. You can get some really good faction effects once you do get Carrick 8 peaks, but you're spending, like, you can either rush it, which has its own issues, or you can take your time, which has its own issues. It's, like, again, I feel like Old World just does this so much better. I think, really, Belegar does need a different starting position in his campaign to really go for Carrick 8 peaks for that quest. That's my perspective on the matter. Or maybe a dual start. Like, this is the one campaign of the Dwarves that I think needs a Legendary Lord rework the most. Number 4, we have Ungrim Ironfist, the Slayer King of Carrick Cadrin. Before Thrones of Decay, he was the worst Legendary Lord of the Dwarves, but now he is significantly better. I wish they did improve his faction effects, to be honest, because just getting construction costs for Slayer Shrine and recruitment costs for Slayers, it's not really the greatest benefit in the world. However, while that's still the case, Ungrim himself is significantly better as a lord, because he now gets a new skill line, which is shared with the Demon Slayers, that gives him weapon strength, missile resistance for Slayers, as well as casualty replenishment for Slayers on top of his Doomseeker skill. So he gets 20% casualty replenishment for Slayers, as well as upkeep benefit for Slayers, and improving Journey's End in order to make it even more powerful. He is really going to lead an army of Slayers, and it's a much better situation from that particular perspective, because you now have Slayer Pirates, you now have Doomseekers, so it is a better situation from that perspective. On top of that, Ungrim gets a replenishment hero from turn 1 because he can recruit a Dragon Slayer from Carrick Cadrin. Or rather, you just fight your initial battles over here, take the lair, and then recruit a Dragon Slayer. He also has the easiest access to Ungrim Ironfist because he can recruit Slayers from turn 1, and he will want to recruit Slayers unlike, say, Malachi. And so you get 2 replenishment heroes pretty early on. I mean, Malachi does have Gotrek and Felix, so Felix gives replenishment, can get Ungrim pretty quickly, but it's still a pretty good situation from that perspective. Furthermore, with Ungrim, he can easily wipe out Azak. And this is exactly what I've done in this campaign, because I kind of realized, wait, Azak is just going to march over here. He's going to try and go for Raziak. If I just rush him, I can eliminate his capital city, which contains all his recruitment, and just pulverize the bastard, which is exactly what I did. Which is what I did, and then turn around, you get another army, of course, start getting that pretty early on in point of fact, and, you know, go deal with Skarsnik while he's busy fighting with Forgrim. So lots of potential in this campaign, and in point of fact right here I just defeated Vlad, who, yeah, he's powerful, but Vlad can't stand up, Vlad's army can't stand up to an army of dwarves, because, yeah, he's just going to recruit a bunch of weak skeletons. The settlements that Ungrim does have aren't the greatest, but he does have a great climate situation in multiple ways. First off, he does have frozen, so you can confederate Grumbrindle and Malachi and use their terrain, but on top of that, quite crucially, he has Chaotic Wasteland as unpleasant. It's not the best situation, but it does mean that if you end up fighting a campaign over here, you actually have a lot more territorial potential than in other campaigns. So it ends up actually working out quite well. You won't be able to complete a legendary grudge quite as quickly, but you will gain so many grudges so early because of the foes you're fighting and the quest battles that you do have access to, that you will be able to deal with, that you'll be able to confederate a legendary lord reasonably quickly. And that is a significant benefit because it gives you access to Grumbrindle, and because you have the same climate, it ends up being a significant potential. And on top of that, because you can deal with Azak pretty quickly, you can actually start building up towards 2 legendary grudges, though it will take longer to do those, but you can get the Caracate Peak grudge sorted out reasonably quickly in this campaign. Certainly not as fast as, say, Forgrim or even Forek, but you can still at least do it. And you can also restore the Android. That's 5,000 grudges that you can sort out in this campaign. And once you do sort them out, it just becomes a steamroll. You get Grumbrindle, you get campaign movement range, you get a lot of power. So yeah, Ungrim is a lot better as a legendary lord. It's less about the lore than his effect, so certainly leading an army of slayers is work a lot better right now. But it's more so about like campaign position, potential from that position, dwarf rework benefiting him, climate situation, and just the sheer number of possibilities. I mean, you could technically argue you can deal with the Silver Pinnacle grudge, but yeah, I would not do that early on because it is going to consume a lot of resources. You'll probably make bank money-wise, but still, just be wary of that. A bit of a shame that Uzufbar doesn't particularly like you, but there's ways to skin a cat in that respect. I've got covered over confederations before. So yeah, I think, like, I understand why people don't like Ungrim as much. I mean, he certainly was the worst legendary lord by far of the dwarves, and one of the worst in the entire game besides, like, Daniel, because it felt like playing generic lord, but now his playstyle is significantly better. At number 3 is Grumbrindle, the White Dwarf, a very spiteful dwarf who traveled across the entire world just to beat up Malekith, and who doesn't like playing a campaign where your main objective is to just beat up Malekith. And then Valkia, and then everyone that stands in your way. Purge the elves, leave none alive, take Ulfwan and ally Nakari to sell Ulfwan to someone because you have a legendary grudge that does give you benefits if you take all of Ulfwan, but to be honest, the Ulfwan itself is not necessarily worth it as a territory. Still, a significantly powerful legendary lord in more ways than you might imagine. First off, his faction effects, not worth talking about, though that weapon strength when fighting against elves is certainly useful. But the faction effects are the Ancestors' Blessing. So you can either get an army benefit, a benefit for Grumbrindle's fighting prowess, which is very formidable. In fact, Grumbrindle, in terms of, like, the most powerful legendary lord on the battlefield, it ain't Ungrim, it ain't Forgrim, it's Grumbrindle. I mean, genuinely, like, he's even better in terms of 1v1 potential than even Malachi, which is saying a lot considering Malachi's ranged bullshit. But you get faction effects through the Ancestor's Blessing, like Control, Corruption, 20% Casualty Replenishment, which is even better than getting a Dragon Slayer early on, though don't worry, you can get plenty of those as well. But on top of that, you can also get the research construction benefit as well when you're playing Grombrindle. Oh, you just took a province and you're concerned they might rebel? No worries, 10 control will sort you right out, no problem whatsoever. What's quite ridiculous about Grombrindle, though, is, well, he has 4 quest battles, so he'll get 2,000 settled grudges, which is very significant early on. But he won't have a legendary grudge he can do very quickly, so that's a bit of a shame. But he has the best blue skill line in the entire game by far. He gets 15% campaign movement range. He gets 6% casualty replenishment. He gets free recruit rank. He gets up to 15% recruitment cost for all armies, all characters. This is ridiculously powerful. On top of that, he personally gets 15% extra campaign movement range, so it's very easy, especially the fact that we can get engineers much earlier in a campaign. He can get to the movement range cap in a campaign. And then on top of that, he does have a Quarreler benefit, but crucially, he has an Iron Drake benefit and a leadership benefit for his army. And you know how Malachi is powerful because he gets a missile strength for war machines and range units? Well, you get an Iron Drake war machine benefit and an ammunition benefit. Like, Grombrindle doesn't care about tradition. He's like, get out the flamethrowers and burn everything in the world to dust. So he is quite absurd. And another benefit you do get in this campaign when you're playing him, well, if you're playing any other dwarf campaign, you obviously want to get Grombrindle as your first legendary lord confederation, because that movement range is enormously powerful, the most powerful benefit you can get. But the problem is, Grombrindle, out of all the legendary lords when played by the AI, he's very likely to be wiped out by Malekith. It doesn't always happen, but in like 90% of cases it does happen. So, playing Grombrindle, you avoid that, and you have a lot more choices in terms of who you want to confederate, dependent on how things have played out on the campaign. And while he doesn't have the same climate benefits as Ungrim with Chaos Wasteland, he still gets frozen. And because of the changes to climate over here in this corner of Nagrand, you are actually in a really good situation. So great campaign, great legendary lord. You can paint the map faster than any other legendary lord of the dwarves in this campaign. And number 2 is Thorgrim Grudgebearer, who actually starts with 2 Grudge Seller units, the Longbeards and the Hammerers, so he's in a pretty good spot. And on top of that, he also gets the High King ability, which increases the Age of Reckoning Grudge Seller army by 5. So you know how CA nerfed that Grudge Seller army? Thorgrim doesn't feel that nerf at all, so he's stronger from those perspectives. I wouldn't think much of the Longbeard Hammerer benefit, but he does get the diplomatic relations benefit with the dwarves. He does have more powerful commandments. While they're not a night and day difference, they're still beneficial. And on top of that, he's close enough to free dwarven minor factions. So you got Barak Var, you've got Zufbar, and you've got Karak-Azul that you can confederate through regular diplomacy. And now that we no longer have a downside to that, yeah, that does give him a good amount of territory that he can play around with. Furthermore, he gets hero capacity and hero recruit rank for the 3 main dwarf heroes, with the exception of course, Dragon Slayers. He also gets control and growth in all provinces. He'll get more growth through his commandment, and he also gets 20% campaign movement range after winning a battle. So it is really a pretty strong campaign. The real downside is the climate situation, but honestly, outside of that, Thorgrim is in a pretty good spot. I would not have rated him as highly as people did, but I can understand why. He starts with an engineer, he starts with a good position. He does start with only a tier 1 settlement, which does impose certain limitations on him, but there's a lot of things that just flat out do work in this campaign, and he is certainly a very iconic character for Warhammer in general, let alone Total War Warhammer itself, as the original dwarf legendary lord alongside Ungrim. So while long term with the frozen climate situation you won't achieve quite as much, it's it's very proper for a dwarf campaign what you do have. And also you start with gyro bombers, which are bloody fantastic with all those wonderful bombs, firing while moving, doing a good amount of damage, and reducing the speed of enemy units. So yeah, can't go wrong with Forgrim. I just think some other campaigns are better, but I understand the ranking over here. And then at number 1 is Malachi Makaisen of the Dwarves. And yes, this is a very sticky situation. I enabled the early game end game crisis, and this apparently happened. Don't ask me how it happened. It's something I'm wondering about myself over here. Regardless though, Malachi is great because he's really the Gotrek and Felix campaign personified. You got a lot of objectives, a lot of adventures to go on over here in this particular campaign that give you a significant level of variety in your campaign that you just don't have in any other campaign. Like, Creative Assembly has tried to do objective-based campaigns before. The Changeling is one of those examples, but I don't think they've ever really succeeded. Certainly nowhere near as much as Malachi, and oh boy, this map is certainly going places, isn't it? Beyond these objectives, which also buff up these units significantly and give you more reason to play with diverse armies than you would in other campaigns. Like, for instance, one of the things a lot of people might do is, like, they just go cannons, but you can also go with gyrocopters and make that work. You can go Goblin Hewers if you want. I think that's the least interesting one. You can go with gyro bombers, which I was doing in this campaign. You can get flame cannons, you can get organ guns, you can get thunder barges. You get a lot of variety in this campaign, and it's what's great because of the starting position. There's even more variety because you got the Chaos Wastelands to the north of you. So further variety added in this campaign compared to what you would usually get by default. So it ends up being a really great and interesting campaign as a result of it. And furthermore, you do get even more variety with the fact that you do get the Spirit of Grugni as a recruitment platform for units on the campaign map. So that is, as well, pretty good, pretty interesting. You get Master Engineer recruitment globally, you get artillery benefits, casualty replenishment, reload time reduction for artillery and flying war machine units. You don't get the Iron Drake benefit that Grombrundle has, so you're not running around like with flamethrowers, but you're running around with flying flamethrowers with the brimstone guns. So really great campaign, not really much to criticize about it. Like, CA nailed it with this campaign. Like, some people would say, like, oh, this is just number 1 because it's new. No, it's not number 1 because it's new. I don't believe that. I don't think that's why people voted in number 1. I think people voted in number 1 because it genuinely is a very interesting, compelling campaign to actually play in a lot of ways. Like, from the starting position to the variety of units, variety of mechanics in the campaign just really works. And yeah, the Gotrek and Felix fantasy realized, finally. It would be nice to get voice acting for Gotrek and Felix, but I imagine getting Brian Blessed again would be difficult. Still, besides that particular quibble, great campaign, really not much to complain about. Like, I've played this campaign so many times since I got access to Thrones of Decay, and I haven't gotten bored yet. And that's saying a lot, because when you play a lot of campaigns like myself, you do tend to get tired after a certain point. For Malachi, that point is certainly much further away than in any other campaign in the game. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and let me know what you guys think about all of this. Well, I already know what you guys think. You voted on it. Stay tuned for more. Next up, High Elves or Tomb Kings. We'll see.